Please listen carefully.
My brain has collapsed into itself, you know?
I think our energy right now really bodes well for the next 3 episodes we're going to record today. What's up, sisters? Welcome back to another episode of Everyone and Their Sister. My name is Christina.
I'm Natasha.
And I'm Stephanie.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. You have started in the rest of our December content. This is the beginning of the end for the rest of our episodes this year. Just a heads up, today we're going to be talking about the best books of 2020. This can be either things we read in 2020, things that came out in 2020. Each one of us chose sort of a different direction. And next week we'll have our best movies of 2020. The week after that will be our best TV shows of 2020. And then we're going to take a little bit of a break for that sort of week in between Christmas and New Year's Eve. And then we'll be back next year with a Bridgerton review. And I'm teasing that for Steph specifically.
And everyone listening. We know that everyone's excited, not just me.
We can't wait, but I wanted to give a little rundown of sort of like what we're going to be talking about today and what the rest of our year is going to look like. Don't freak out when there's not an episode on the 29th. Like, it's fine. We're taking a little break. Big thanks to quarantine, we managed to get an episode out every week for the last 6 months, which is a crowning achievement in my books. All right, before we get into the whole episode for today, what are you guys reading or watching right now?
On my plans are to watch 2 music documentaries. Taylor Swift on Disney Plus and Shawn Mendes on Netflix. I haven't watched either. Don't know if they're good, but I have high hopes.
What am I reading?
What I love is that the only reason this question is difficult for Nat is not because like, oh, what is she reading? It's because she's reading 9 things at fucking once.
Let me just take a little look-see at what I'm actually reading, because it actually is a problem. I'm sorry. I'm not that sorry, actually.
Are you I'm surprised you haven't been rereading stuff, because that's literally all I've been able to do.
I honestly tried, and then all these library books came in, and I was like, I can't. Like, I have to finish them. I have to finish all of them before the time runs out. Some of them I've been waiting for 6 months for,
Oof.
so like I'm reading them.
I do feel like the library app has ruined you slightly because you've got the book hoarding mentality, but then you don't get to keep the book, so you have to read it. And so I feel like that's all you do. You'll be like, oh, I listened to 4 books today while I worked a full day, baked and made crafts and like all this shit. And I'm like, you can just take a break, right? Like, you don't have to finish a book every single day of the year.
I get stressed about it. Like, when letting go of a book from the library app, when I have to let it go and just like return it and be like, no, we're done here, or like I'll come back to you a few months later, it is the most difficult decision of my life. Like, it's hard for me. And I know like it marks my place, so I could come back to it later in like 2 months or whatever, but it's like I go through a crisis in that moment when I'm like, return. But anyway, what I'm reading right now is the second book in the Foundations trilogy by Robert something. It's called Shortfall. It's really good.
Oh, I wanted to read that.
Yeah. It's probably one of like the handful of white dudes I've read this year, and it's the only one I've really, really enjoyed. So what about you, Christina?
So this weekend, I am ready to get fully into the Christmas spirit. Mariah Carey has come to me in my dreams. It is now time for me to burst forth into the Christmas bubble. So after we finish this recording, I'm going to pull out my Christmas shit, put up my tree, and I'm going to play some janky ass Christmas movies. Jingle Jangle is definitely on the list. I recognize that's not a janky Christmas movie. That's like a genuinely good one, I believe. But immediately following Jingle Jangle, I will absolutely watch things called, these are not actual movies, these are just things I'm guessing, the 12 Dates of Christmas, Christmas Wrapping, A Christmas to Love, Christmas Prince Baby, Small Town Christmas. Oh, the Princess Switched one. So that's going to be me for the next month. It will become Christmas Town in this house, and the only thing I will watch is Christmas movies.
Excited for you.
One thing I'm really intrigued by what Netflix has created is the concept of the Christmas TV show. So an entire series dedicated to the concept of Christmas.
I heard Dash and Lily is good. Marina told me.
So yeah, That's really on my list. They started releasing them last year, and I actually didn't watch any of them because I was like, no, I like the Hallmark movies. I'll stick with this. But more and more, I'm like, that's a lot of hours to dedicate to one like perfect piece of crap Christmas story that I just like absolutely love. So I'm excited for this year. I'm gonna roll into Dash and Lily.
I think they gear more towards good rather than bad. That's my guess. Dement.
I don't know
Disagree.
that they do. But I say that not having watched any of them. At least the one I remember from last year.
Let It Snow.
And
Wait,
then there's
was that a
another one.
movie?
It's
That was a movie.
Oh.
Let It Snow was a movie. There was a one from last year. I wish I could remember the name of, but it's still on Netflix. This was an original. They also have like Merry Happy Whatever, which is another Christmas show.
Oh
It's one of
yeah.
those ones where it's probably better than the movie, but also the Netflix Hallmark stuff is slightly better than the Hallmark stuff in general.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of maybe Christmas Prince, it's all slightly better. So it's just about like leveling out their qualities. All right, so let's roll into our best books of 2020. Steph, you go first. Is this a book that you've read or a book that came out this year?
It came out this year and I read it. I've done both. Okay, this is like a true struggle for me. As we know, I don't like to commit to anything. Honorable mention is the Talia Hibbert Act Your Age Eve Brown, which doesn't come out this year, but I read an arc of it. So in my heart, that's number one. It's the highest rated book I have on Goodreads at the moment. So the book I'm picking is The Roommate by Rosie Dannon. This is her debut novel, which, good start. I'm going to say, so I'm going to spoil it for you. Christina, do you care?
No.
Okay. I feel like it's kind of a spoiler, but yeah. So if you don't want any spoilers of this book, skip ahead to XYZ. I don't know what time. Will give me less than 10 minutes. It's obviously a romance book, but it is between Clara, who is a rich aristocratic. I'm saying aristocratic as in like 21st century aristocrat. She comes from money in New York, I believe, and a porn star named Josh Darling. That is his porn star name. And they become roommates and they fall in love. And this book really surprised me because I was like, how have I not read a book about a porn star before? You read a lot about escorts, you read a lot about like the Kiss Quotient was an escort, but you never really see someone who's actually in the porn industry. And I was like, why is this the first book I'm reading? I'm sure there's probably other ones that I don't know about, but it was so good.
When I first started this book, I actually didn't like it at
Yeah.
first because you come in from her like weird society point of view and you're like, I hate it. Like I was like, I hate everything about this.
What is even the word for her? Elite, an elite family, East Coast family. Kind of like Succession. She's from the family of Succession. She moves to LA for a guy, which again, I mean, we all have that same like, don't do it, girl. Don't do it. But she did it anyways. And then she ends up stuck with this roommate named Josh, who she doesn't know. So she's kind of the only person that doesn't know he is a porn star. So her literal aunt has to tell her, like, oh, yeah, he's like a really famous porn star. I can't believe you haven't heard of him before. So she goes home. She's on the couch. Number one, girl, you should have been in your bedroom, but the story wouldn't have worked if you were in your bedroom. Opens up her laptop, puts in his name, looks at his videos. Guess who comes home and sees her screen? Josh. And she immediately closes it and is like, oh, sorry. Just looking at your work. Okay, so he has an on and off relationship with his fellow porn star co-star Naomi. At the point of the movie book, they break up. So he's a free agent, as we say. So it's like really interesting to learn the behind the scenes of like porn star industry. I really am interested in like
Yeah.
Rosie and how she did the research for that. OnlyFans has really exploded. And like
Mhm.
that's only just made me more curious of like, okay, so like how do you get into this industry? How do you the contracts that they have are very like limited. You can only be with one studio at a time. You can't
The
really be.
merchandise conversation, like it was like
Yeah.
really fascinating to read about.
So I didn't know porn stars. Well, it makes sense. If you're popular, yeah, people are gonna buy your merchandise. You're like sex toys, you're like
They're
toys.
basically like sex influencers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
So no wonder you loved it.
Christina, my brain has exploded into of course, exactly. Yes. The secondary plot line is that is that Clara has the money to invest in a company that Josh and his ex-girlfriend slash business partner Naomi want to do, which is like a sex positive website where you can go and learn different things. You learn about like casting, they do videos for people. Like, I'm sure this exists in the real world. I just don't know where. And I thought it was a great idea. Um, the only thing people said that this book was like extremely sexy, and like, yes, I thought it was, but I didn't think it was as hot and bothered as it was sold to
Hard
me.
agree.
Yeah, like nothing out of the ordinary for a romance book. Could have used more. There was like a light hint of like a threesome there that never really was talked about. I'm like, that was a missed opportunity. Um, Clearly, I think Naomi was attracted because she's bisexual. She was a little bit attracted to Clara. But then just to follow up with this, I also read the second book that comes out next year, and the premise is Naomi and a rabbi, which
The snort that came out of your mouth.
I just didn't. That was
I
very
know.
unexpected.
I know. Honestly, it's well done too.
It's sitting in my my NetGalley app, and I'm quite excited to read it.
Look at what Fleabag did.
Well,
Hot rabbi.
literally hot rabbi. He's kind of like a Seth Cohen, like truly the nicest man. I don't want to give anything away, but like, so again, pleasantly surprised by these books Rosie is typing out. Truly surprised, and I loved it.
Here's what I got a question though. At what point are you literally spoiling or giving away anything in a romance book?
I feel
And
like
it's not
this,
like a slam against it. I think it's totally
yeah.
fine. But I don't. None of this is unexpected. Like, of course, this was how she was going to find out that he was a porn star. Like, of course, she was going to be watching a video and he was going to walk in. Like, that's exactly what you
I
would
mean, you
expect and
definitely
want.
see it coming as you're reading it even. I mean, like, if you read enough romance, you know that's
Yeah.
if you watch enough movies, you know it's gonna happen, but it's like it's the way you get there and how what she does with it after that you're like, "Okay, this is well done." Like, if it were there were ways where it could have gone wrong in a romance, and I have
Oh
seen
yeah.
it done before.
And it was like interesting to like hear the stigma about like porn stars and stuff. I'm like, they're artists. Like people are watching their stuff all the time. They're making content again, content creators. Unfortunately, they're under umbrella of like a agency or whatever. But it's interesting to see that other side of content creation. To be again, you can tell I'm like fascinated by OnlyFans and the people that put stuff out there.
Your like obsession with understanding more things about OnlyFans is really funny to me because I love the idea like Steph doesn't want her face on the internet, but Loki is like, but the rest of me.
I can put my foot out.
You charge big money for that. Big money for that foot.
I mean, how
Steph
many people
McFoot.
can say in this day and age that they've never seen a porn video? Like, I don't think anyone can
Oh yeah.
actually say that. So it's interesting that again, no one or that I've seen has like really had people like the dynamic of like. So technically, he stops sleeping with women when he's together with her. But like, what if you were dating someone who was like an active porn star? Like, how do you navigate like this person sleeping with someone else, but they're also coming back home to me? Like, that is really interesting. I hope she kind of talks about that in a later book. Like, I would love to see how someone navigates that.
I would definitely also be interested in that. Something that navigated the idea of like you don't quit your job just because you started dating somebody.
Like, that's fascinating to me.
Mhm.
How long can someone be in this industry for before they don't want to do it anymore? They're considered old, especially for women. Basically, this book really surprised me. It made me think about a lot of things that I haven't really put too much thought into. OnlyFans, hello. Yeah. I put this at a 4. I think I should give it a 5. I'm looking at my Goodreads right now. That's it. That's all I gotta say. I went over our limit, I'm pretty sure.
All right, Nat, what was your best book of the year?
So my best book. Okay, this is really hard because I had a really good year in books. You guys know this. I was a lot more intentional in what I read this year because I've been carefully tracking what I've been reading, specifically how many BIPOC and queer authors I was reading. It made it easier for me to distance myself from those white male authors. Probably only read like maybe a handful of them this year compared to what I normally would have read if I compared to last year. So because of like the way I was intentionally reading, I decided to choose something very intentional for this pick, even though we know some of my favorite picks are probably more likely like Addie LaRue and some other things, but I decided to go with Caste: The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson. Um, it is an Oprah book club pick as well, and I thought this is probably one of the better Oprah picks I've read because I don't really love all the books that she tends to pick. Like, she picked American Dirt, so, like,
Oprah.
questionable, sometimes questionable. But if you haven't heard about Caste already, it's kind of everywhere right now. It came out, I think, this fall or something like that. Caste is a nonfiction book about America's unspoken caste system, which is obviously based on the idea behind the caste system in India. So, if you don't already know what that caste system is, it's basically a system of dividing society by classes. So, but classes would be a bit more of like a socio-economical basic versions of like middle class, upper class, and it's based on the wealth gap. But in this book, it's specifically looking at America adopting something similar to the deeper caste system of India, which is hereditary. So it makes it nearly impossible to surpass your caste slash, I'm using air quotes here, class that you're born into, despite your occupation or wealth. And obviously, in this case, it's based on race. So race is that caste system that she's talking about. Honestly, this book was like geniusly written. I don't know why I didn't think it would be written really well. I was just like, I read, if anybody else this year has been reading a lot of anti-racist nonfiction this year, you know that like everything kind of read the same way, and I don't know if anybody else feels that way. Feel free to jump in about it or like correct me about it, but like it everything kind of felt very basic, and it felt like on a scale of discovering we're not living in a post-racial world and like a decolonized mindset, most of those books felt like they were educating the lower end of that scale. And so when I was reading a lot of the anti-racist books, I just felt like I wasn't gaining or gleaning anything new from the writing. But Cast completely blew it out of the water for me. While I was reading this, I had to put this book down like 4 or 5 times because it was a hard read, but it was also like you really had to digest some of the topics she was talking about because even though it seemed obvious, the comparisons she was making were incredible. Um, she has like the perfect example of the caste system at work in America, so she has like a good balance as well. So you're not just getting like hard facts blown at you throughout the whole book. It's not like reading a textbook. She gives you like actual stories about people. She gives stories about herself. She gives stories about Satchel Paige, the baseball player. She gives stories about specific Nazi stories. She gives stories about anonymous white people in America, like things that have come up in the historical record, but she doesn't like name anybody, obviously. Martin Luther King Jr., and she even has stories about Albert Einstein. Like she weaves in like real life stories into this book that makes it so. She even talks about her plumber. So it's like there's so many little things in this book that make it even more compelling as you're reading. And so because this whole book is about that, I'm not going to like get into like the crazy details of it, but she there's a huge point that she makes in this book that I have had a hard time splitting away from. Like, it's like changed how I look at I guess like North America in general. And she talks about how what America did to Black people is worse than what Nazi Germany did to Jews. And it is a huge, like, it's a huge thing to say in a book, because you think about it, she's not actually wrong. Because if you think about it, what Nazi Germany did was over a shorter period of time. Yes, it was genocide. But if you look at what America's doing, it's been happening for over 400 years and it's continually still happening. So when you add all that up, it's almost like it is worse. It is so much worse. It's infected the system that we live in. But to not I don't want to spoil too many things from the book, but I'm just going to talk about 3 huge points that really stuck out to me and very disturbing. I'm going to give a little content warning, but I'm not going to talk about details of them.
Before we get into it a little bit, I think one really important note to that with regards to like even that point is I think it's really easy to forget or for so many people, particularly white people, to not realize that like we're still in the middle of a genocide of indigenous and black people.
Absolutely.
Like it's an ongoing thing that's been happening for hundreds of years. Like it's still happening. So I think it's fair to describe something as worse
Yeah.
because at least, a country might be trying to make up to a certain extent for some of those things, whereas America still
Mhm.
won't admit that it's in the middle of happening, and so Canada as well.
Yeah, and the thing is the way she words it is She doesn't shy away from saying genocide. It is genocide. It absolutely is. Use the words that you actually mean. She goes in on America so hard that I was just like, "Oh, Isabel, love you."
Is she American?
'Cause she is American, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so the 3 points that I wanna talk about. Content warning, I'm not gonna go into the details of them because it's too disturbing to actually talk about, and I'd rather not do that with a like, I could never do it with a straight face. But the first one that was really interesting was that in the years leading up to the Third Reich, American eugenicists books were actually bestsellers in Germany. I had no idea about this, by the way. This is completely news to me. So obviously, Nazis didn't need anyone to teach them hate because they already did very much hate. But what they did do was they actually sent researchers to America leading up to the Third Reich to learn how white people subjugated black people in American laws. Yeah, and that's fucking great. And these are laws that are still in place, by the way, today. And the Nazis basically took that research, applied it back in Germany, but it wasn't as lasting and permanent as we know. And even some of the laws that she was saying that they used to like round up Jews or like to describe what a Jew is wasn't as drastic as the way America discussed black people. And it's actually like disgusting the way she lays it out. It's so disturbing to think about it that way, that the fact that even Germany was like, "Oh yeah, America does hate, right?"
Ugh.
So like it's the second big thing was in her research she was actually researching how Germany has been attempting to reconcile their history, which is important to think about because specifically she talks about how Europe doesn't have statues that celebrate people who made society worse. They never they if there were any, they definitely took them down and they never stayed up longer than the Third Reich was in power. And so, uh, she talks about how the Union, even though they won, quickly became apologists towards their Southern opposition and pardoned every single one of them. Every
What?
single one of them got pardoned. In fact, they got celebrated even though they lost, and they stood for the worst people in society. They got streets named after them, they had buildings named after them. How many Robert E. Lee high schools are there? There's a lot. It's stupid. And like there's statues, and she says they erected these statues of these people that were oppressing others, and it continued. Even just having the statue up was almost another form of oppression. It was like, "Hey, these people that were oppressing you before are still doing it in the form of this symbolic gesture." Like, what the fuck? Nobody does that. Who celebrates that? Only America. Well, not only America, we know that. There's some other parts of the world that
Did
do
she
that, but
did she talk about, like, because I know this came out in August. Did she talk about, like, people taking down statues, like, in June and July?
yeah, she did discuss it and how, actually she did discuss a very specific story, which I found completely fascinating. So there was a statue in New Orleans, I believe, and the city voted to take it down, even though it was, like, a really tight vote, but every time a construction company tried to take it down, their families were attacked by white
What?
supremacists. They were attacked at the thing. They couldn't take it down. It took them, like, over 2 years until finally a Black-owned construction company agreed to take it down with police protection provided. They all had to dress up so that their faces were covered so nobody could identify who they were. People kept having, like, like, white supremacists kept sending drone cameras in to, like, spy on them, to try to figure out where they lived, to figure out their families, threaten their families. Like, it was fucked up. When they finally took it down, it took so much work just to take down that one statue. How much money from the city had that cost at that point? Like, you're paying for police protection, you're paying for all these, like, security measures. They had to pay, like, I think she said, like, 3 times more than they initially would have to that construction company. That's insane to me. It was just like, oh, I have chills even thinking about it. It's just, like, the most disturbing, and she got, like, really deep into the research, and the stories were so compelling, exactly like that one. I guess, like, the final thing I will point out that really stuck out to me from this book, there was a passage about some postcards. I'm not gonna talk about them, but I'll just say when you get to it, because you absolutely should be reading this book, you're gonna need to take a 4-day break like I did. Like, it was that disturbing to me, the way she talks about some postcards, that still exist in circulation, by the way. She was able to find it in the historical record. She was able to look at them, and I don't think anybody should have to. It was very depressing. But this book was beautifully written, despite all of that. The way she went in on the US, I would argue she could have probably gone in harder. She did go fairly hard, and the fact that this is a book that people are actually reading and picking up, I think is really important. Out of all of the anti-racist type of books that I've read, this is 100% the best one I've read so far. I don't think somebody would have to top this by a lot. This is the only one that I gleaned new information from. She went and drew like she's been doing years of research on this. This is like she joined like this like she like did her research with a bunch of like South Asian communities. Like she went to their like they have like talks about caste system and stuff like that. And so she like went there. She's part of that community now. And like she's done years of research on this. So you can tell the conclusions that she draws. They're real. Like there's no way you can gaslight this woman about what she's saying is like she's solid. Like everything is well done in this book.
People will still try.
People will still try for sure. I do think she weaves in the subtitle, the discontents of the origins of our discontents. She weaves that title in so beautifully in some of her passages, guys. Oh, it's a play on words, so it's so well done. So not only is she like well researched, she writes so well as well. I didn't know that she'd won a
Pulitzer?
Pulitzer?
Pulitzer. I just like any words. I'm like, no, it's done. But I hadn't known she won a Pulitzer for her last book, so I'm probably gonna read that one too.
I will say, because yeah, this year there were just so many white people discovering racism for the first time.
Yeah.
So a lot of the books that were going around were very like white fragility, white rage, very like basic intro stuff where the audience was very much white
Mhm.
people
Mhm.
who like, hey, white people who have never considered that it's hard for other people to live in their lives before.
Yeah.
But I will say a couple of books that I read this year that I think are also worth mentioning as like excellent ones, particularly because I feel like the audience is not white people. Is Thick and Other Essays by
Mhm.
Tressie McMillan Cotton. I think that was excellent. And I really want to shout out Hood Feminism by Mickey Kendall.
Oh yeah, that's a good
I
one.
didn't, yeah, I didn't see that one get as much attention this year, and I thought it really should have.
It
Thick is
I mean,
interesting because
it
as it's
did. It was sold out everywhere.
okay, I mean in terms of again where the number one book was fucking White Fragility and like
Oh
there's
yeah.
a significant better one. Also, there's no shade. I feel like when Hood Feminism came out, I can see it not having the number of items in stock it should have.
Oh,
Like that
100%.
strikes me as a book.
It was not printed as much as it should have been,
Yeah.
which is bullshit.
Yeah, so that one is really good. So I recommend those two quite a bit as well.
Yeah.
But I
I
really
would
want to read Cass. That's on my list.
I wonder if they
I
pushed up her publication date because
Yeah, like, it definitely felt like it was, like, years in the running, but there was a lot of relevant stuff from this
yeah.
year. So, like, she talks about the pandemic in it, so, like, it's up to date.
That's a close editing
Yeah,
time to
it's very well
publication.
done, and, like, it's not like it doesn't feel rushed when you're reading it. I would say this book is probably better if you are already on your journey to decolonize your mind. I think this is a great book. If you're just starting out, might be a little little too much because it is a lot of information. I did give a rating for this book, 10 Pulitzers out of 10 helpful plumbers.
All right, Christina, your time has come.
Right. So this is an interesting year because this year an N.K. Jemisin book came out. And it wasn't technically my best book of the year. I have to say, and this hurt me. I don't use Goodreads anymore, but I do still vote in the Goodreads end of year thing because I just want to do my little part for those authors. Okay. I want to vote for Cemetery Boys. And I have to say, when I was voting in the fantasy section, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue was definitely my best book of the year for sure. But since we already talked about
The
that,
best of the year, really? For
I
you?
think that book genuinely, I loved it. It was beautiful. The story was amazing. Like when Nat talked about it, I was very interested.
Yeah.
And then when I read it, I was like, oh, this is even better than I thought it was going to be because it just,
Wow.
for me, that book, and I'll say for myself, like as my personal preferences, encompasses just the right amount of a fantastical element where it's not like a heavy fantasy book, but there is an element of magical realism or something to that extent. That for me really works, where it almost feels like speculative fiction in a way. And I just thought that book was beautiful. I thought V.E. Schwab did a great job. I'm going to go back and keep trying her other books because of how much I like this one. But we picked this book already. Nat talked about it. She gave a rundown.
I'm
So what
delighted.
works, Mhm. What works out really great there is it means I can still talk about my N.K. Jemisin book because that comes in as my favorite book of the year if it's not Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. So as long as I get a chance to talk about Nora, I'm happy. Yeah, Nora. I call her. We're on a first name basis now. I call her Nora because I follow her Twitter and other people use it, and I'm like, I love that because calling her NK constantly does feel odd. Or I'll use her full name. I'm like, you need to throw respect, okay? It's NK Jemisin, fucking MacArthur Genius Grant winner. Thank you very much. Or receiver. I don't know what you would call that. The City We Became came out so much earlier this year. This is a read from back in like February. I think it came out in March. And I love this book so much. So the plot of this series, because it is going to be, I believe, a trilogy, is that cities, after they've been around for long enough and after enough of a mythos and a legend has been built around the city, it can literally become alive. And it people who live in that city will become avatars or representatives of that city and its feeling of life. Like the city has emotions and powers and all these different things. And New York is one of the next cities that is about to become alive, and it's the first city in quite some time to do so. And they need to make sure that its coming alive is successful because some of the last cities that tried to come alive ended up not making it all the way. Like there's things that need to happen in order for a city to truly like reach its potential and reach its life, and they need that to happen for New York. And the way that it works with New York is because there's different boroughs, each borough has its own representative, sort of. So each person that is currently in that borough takes on the feelings and the emotions and the representation of that borough in like a fantastical kind of way. So they'll sometimes have powers that represent themselves, but they'll also be like the perfect representative of what it means to live in that borough and to be there. Like one of the ones that I think is really interesting is Manhattan is somebody who just got off the fucking train from a small town and is moving to Manhattan to the big city for the first time. His name is Manny.
Manny.
And he comes in, and then the moment he steps into New York and he becomes Avatar, he forgets his old life entirely. He's got a very Wall Street slash entirely ethnically ambiguous vibe. Like he perfectly represents what someone in Manhattan is and like why they come here. And she does that for Brooklyn. For Queens is like a 25-year-old Tamil immigrant who's like a mathematical student. Staten Island is included as well. It's the only white person. And she is a like Irish, her family is like an Irish immigrant. They live on Staten Island, very Republican. Again, like the only white people. And her life is very interesting the way it sets up. So N.K. Jemisin sets it up so each borough has its own representative, and then there's a single avatar that represents the whole city. There's one person that is like, this is the entirety of New York as it is. And this story is based off a short story that she wrote a really long time ago for her book. What about when is it going to be Black Future Month? She wrote this short story about an artist and like a hustler, like a sort of rent boy kind of idea, of a queer Black homeless youth who becomes the embodiment of what it means to be New York. And that's sort of the main premise. And in giving birth to the city, that sort of main character ends up in trouble. And all the other people that become the avatars need to find them and need to protect them and need to like lift them up so that they can truly become the avatar that represents New York. And so in some ways, it's very traditional fantasy in that there's like a quest. Like all of these people need to find each other and they're all going on a journey together to find the avatar who is New York. And there's representations of other people who have become cities. Like there's a person who became Sao Paulo, a person that became Hong Kong, and they end up coming to try to like help New York because while all of this is going down, there is another ambiguous white racial enemy that is trying to keep New York from becoming alive. And everything is just playing off of each other in this way of like, again, very traditional fantasy. It reads like a movie. Like the whole time I was reading it, I was like, I can already see the miniseries. This whole book is season one, where each episode is about a different person, and then the last 5 episodes are them all coming together and trying to like defeat everything. And it was, as someone who loves cities and who loves a love letter to a city, this worked for me in a million different ways. Like everything that she was writing about made me enjoy reading it because I got it. Her representations of New York are amazing. It's NK Jemisin, so it's incredibly diverse. There's a huge spectrum of people being represented, and they're represented in ways where it's like, this is just what you want from a book. You want full characters who have their own life and their own backstory, and they don't all look the same. And I think that's amazing about her books. Everyone feels so incredibly distinct. And them, I do think them being boroughs helps though, because it is like, that's the Brooklyn personality. Like 1000% that checks out. That's Queens. Staten Island, we just we don't even want it to be a part of New York anymore. Just break it off. So it was really good. It was really interesting. The reason I think this book doesn't top for me and why Addie LaRue probably gets in number one is this is clearly something experimental for her. I think it's very different from her other writing. And it's clearly, again, the start of a trilogy. There is so much more to come. And I have this inkling, I have this little nugget of a feeling of an idea that this one was so not cliche is not the right word, but this followed so many specific fantasy tropes that are very in line with what you would expect in a kind of story like this, in a kind of urban fantasy, that I have a feeling that something is lying in wait for this series. There is something that in book 2 or book 3, I'm gonna be reading through it, and N.K. Jemisin is gonna fucking ruin me. She's gonna do something, and I'm gonna be on the floor with this book being like, I'm dead now. I'll never recover. And I can't wait for that moment. I just have a sneaking suspicion that this book, as simple as it was, all things considered, is the setup for something that is going to be truly, truly excellent.
But that would also be typical for her writing because she does do that. She waits until like second book in. At the end, you're like, what the fuck?
Yeah. That's exactly what I expect from her. And it was one of those things where, like, she just brings me such joy. Where, like, even if this sort of keeps on track with what it is right now and it never turns into that, like, holy shit moment, I'm still just enjoying it. I just love her writing. I love what it does for me. Like, it's absolutely also on a personal level, in addition to her being incredibly talented, that it just speaks to me. And I feel like, as somebody who watches shit like Hallmark Christmas movies, I'm so sick of, or not sick of, but I end up, a lot of things love small towns, and that's fine. If you love a small town, love a small town. But I do love a love letter to a big city a lot. And in the middle of quarantine with people abandoning big cities, it is very nice to remember why people love them, because I still love them. Like, a city will always be it for me. So I do appreciate that she was like, I'm going to write a love letter, not just to New York, but to the concept of a city and what it means to have so many people from so many different places make up something, and what it is to have that kind of life and culture. And I loved it.
It's a great book. I do think this book might have been easier to read than all of her previous books. I'm just putting that out there.
Oh, okay.
It's definitely one of her more accessible titles. I think, again, because it's very modern, obviously, so there's not like fantasy stuff where you're trying to pronounce a bunch of shit you can't. I totally get what some people are saying. Her first chapter in this book is the short story that inspired it, and I think it's a jarring way to start it. I liked it because I knew the short story. So I felt like I understood everything as I was reading it. I know a lot of people felt like it was very confusing and it was a very weird way to start a book. So I can understand that for sure. But also, this is one of those books where whenever you're reading a review about it that's negative, you got to be real careful about who you're reading it from. Because a
Mhm.
lot of people are annoyed that in everyone that represents New York, only one of them is white, and the white person is super fucking racist and a little bit evil. And it's like, that's the way. Like, there's literally a plague. There's literally a plague taking over New York, and that plague is using racism as a way to spread itself, essentially. Because white people are more susceptible to being brainwashed.
Yeah. 100%.
Also,
MLMs, hello, cults.
really appropriate book right before the pandemic started, or like,
Yeah.
yeah, I was just like, oh dang, okay.
Yeah, it hit at the right time. It wasn't quite as on the nose as Songs from the End of the World, but it was there. Yeah. So I really recommend. It's at the moment it's not my favorite NK Jemisin. That will always be for Inheritance trilogy for sure. But again, I can just at one point she's gonna introduce another city. We're gonna get to see more. Like I can feel it, and I'm excited. I'm here for it. And that's my best of. So before we wrap up this episode, we've done our best of. As a reminder, mine was The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin.
Mine was Cast by Isabel Wilkerson.
Mine was The Roommate by Rosie Dannon. Sorry.
Now that we've talked about the good, let's take a quick moment, a little 5-minute thing, and let's talk about just very quickly what was some of the absolute garbage trash that we read this year.
Trash is
Sarah?
in like I enjoyed it.
No,
Or
it was
trash is
bad.
in
Trash is in regrets.
Dig into your negative ratings, Steph, because we know you don't rate anything higher than a 3
Sometimes
anyway.
I was going to say sometimes she likes something and it's a 3, so it's hard to say.
just because this year was a really like a nostalgia. I'm going back to the classics. I decided to pick up the new Cassandra Clare. Here's the thing. I was told it was like light and fluffy, but here's the thing. When you have characters from 2 series that are related to each other, I cannot focus because I need to know who's related to who and how. I cannot like I need a family tree that's accurate. I need a family tree for the years that are missing. I cannot focus on the story when I don't know how this person exists. Like, who are your parents? What's happening? And like the reason I picked it up is because people were complaining that there's too many gay characters or like LGBTQ. They're like, it's not accurate. I'm like, excuse me, did gay people just all of a sudden start existing in the 21st century? No, bullshit. So I was like, I'm gonna go read it. Yeah, a lot of great characters, but again, cannot focus because I don't understand how they're connected, and it pisses me off that I don't know.
It kills me with this because there's so many genuine, legitimate reasons to complain about a Cassandra Clare novel.
Agreed.
There's a lot of things
Exactly.
she does
Yeah.
wrong. But Cassandra Clare does occasionally a couple of things right. And you're complaining about one of the few things that she does right, even if a little bit, it kind of is pandering because she knows that that's what sells. I
Yeah.
see that your Magnus and Alec book only came out after the show made them wildly, incredibly popular by making them much better people. I see you, Cassie.
It's true.
I have lots of feelings about this.
I like it almost makes me want to like revenge like something just to be like, no, none of these reviews.
That's why
Yeah.
I came in coming I'm like I'm coming in hot because I cannot deal with this bullshit.
You were activated.
I was activated and I like yes, we need to see this kind of like representation. And like yeah, she has a big audience, so I like that she does this because I think it's important that like other people get chances when they're like this is also popular. Do you know what I'm saying? But again, give me a fucking like I know it's supposed to be a surprise because I'm in the story of the family tree, but like maybe focus on another family that isn't the same 3.
All of her books are
Fairchild,
related now, right?
Fairchild, Herondale, and Lightwood. But again, color. I cannot focus. Every 5 seconds, I was looking at the family tree, being like, okay, who the fuck is this? who are your brothers? Who are your sisters? Who are you in love with? Why is this a secret? How did we get to where we are in present days? So I give it a 2 out of 5. Will I pick up the next one? Perhaps, honestly. I'm a
Steph's
sucker.
rating system, I don't
know.
understand. I never get it.
2 absolute trash.
Absolute trash, but I'll still read the sequel. What is the one?
2 I'm mad. 2 I'm mad, but I finished it and like I skimmed it. 1 is I couldn't even pretend to skim it / finish, or I finished it and I hated it with the fire of 1,000 suns.
Nat, worst book of the year.
Worst book of the year. This is again hard because I read only really good books, but I did pick up this one that was sent to me through NetGalley called Docile by K.M. Spara. It's Szpara. Zabara. Anyway, it was touted to me as a queer author writing science fiction, and that's all I was told. I did not read a single description. I went in. The tagline for this book is "There is no consent under capitalism." This book is wildly inappropriate. Like there's sex, there's romance, there's all of that, but it's all done under the guise of, oh, you owe a debt, we will make you a sex slave. That's the whole story. And like they're trying to be like, oh, we can make this okay. No. It's It's wild, and he has another book out this year, I believe, and, apparently it's possibly just as bad, and I'm kind of curious.
So
Like
I thought this was so funny because you were picking this, and I was like, oh, let me look this up. And literally, when you read the description, the first two paragraphs are like a heavy science fiction dystopian world where having debt means that you belong to somebody essentially, and you become a docile for them. And then the rest of it follows the romance trope format of introducing the background of
Mhm.
one person, then introducing the background of the second, and then introducing the premise of them meeting each other. And I was like,
No, no,
wait,
no.
is this a romance or is this a heavy sci-fi?
Wild. And it's like it's still very sci-fi because like the whole debt system is very sci-fi. Like you pay a certain amount of debt if you do certain things and it covers a certain amount of years and that's your debt. Like it's a whole thing. He does a really good job of explaining the system, but then you're in the system and you're like, what? And like there is some like political talk in there, but at the end it's still a romance and you're like, what? It blew my mind. I will say that the sex scenes are wild. Like when I say wild, I mean like actually wild, not the roommate wild. I mean
You know
wild.
what this is, Nat? This is a webtoon, but just as a book.
Yes.
I didn't even know what a webtoon
But
was.
like the naughty
I didn't
webtoon.
know what a webtoon.
Where do I watch
Yeah,
that?
yeah, just for context, y'all, Steph said literally the most endearing question I've ever heard in my life yesterday, which was, where do I watch a webtoon? I loved it.
It's
Is
so
it not a video?
cute.
Is it just
It's a comic.
No, it's a comic.
I had no idea.
I was like, "What?"
Uh.
I do recommend the one that I suggested last night. This is outside of the thing, but the one I suggested, it's really good. You should read it.
All right, Christina, what is your most hated?
The way this took 2 seconds to fucking pick, okay? So for a little tiny little bit of background, I'm in two book clubs. I'm in the book club I run with you guys and a couple of our friends, and I'm in another book club with another friend. I love this friend. I love this book club. But the first fucking book that I read for this book club was The Glass Hotel, and I almost never joined another book club with them again because wow, this book was fucking garbage. Okay? Emily St. John Mandel, who I wrote another book that I know people absolutely love, and so this book came out and they were like, this one's got to be great because the other one was great. The Glass Hotel is a piece of shit garbage. Okay. The fact that it's an award winner, the fact that it was shortlisted for the Giller Prize, thank God somebody in the last moment had a little bit of sense and gave that prize to How to Pronounce Knife, because this book should never have gotten that far. Here's what it's about. It's about nothing. It's about absolutely fucking nothing. It's definitely one of those books where it's like no plot, just vibes, except the vibes are terrible. Okay? The book is so boring. The characters are infinitely boring. The hotel is on a little Canadian island where rich people go to spend a weekend, and it's about random things where like the first chapter is about this UFT student who got a job at the hotel to earn some money while he has an addiction, and his sister works at the hotel, so he thought he'd go join her there. And then she ends up running away to live an anonymous life on a cruise ship, and he steals some of her stuff to use in his music, and he becomes super famous for it. So it haunts him for the rest of his life. And also, randomly, there's an entire Ponzi scheme in the middle of the book, which should have been the point of the book, because then chapters follow like a woman who was a mistress for one of the dudes in the Ponzi scheme, and it follows some of the people who worked on Wall Street who created the sections for sort of the like scheme and what was going on. And that's just the middle of the book. That's not the beginning or the end. It's just a thing that's in the middle. And it's like, this is the only part of the book that's a thing. And why would you just have it randomly be here with characters we haven't met before? And then the book ends in the dumbest way possible. And then maybe there's a supernatural element. Maybe there's not. I'm not going to lie to you. You literally, the last chapter, you follow around a ghost. What is the point? This book sucked.
I hate
And
everything you just said.
yeah, this is how terrible this book is. The whole big mystery of the book is that in the first chapter, someone vandalizes the glass windows of the hotel, and literally, oh my god, they treat this like it's a hate crime. Okay? They see the writing on this window and people are somebody dies. Like they're like, I can't believe I've seen this. The wording was, why don't you go eat glass? That's not. I've seen worse things written on the bathroom wall at an Indigo. Like, why did this overwhelm these people so much? And then the mystery that's underlying the whole book is who wrote that, but you kind of know immediately who wrote it, and the end of the book just confirms that that's the person who wrote it, but also who gives a fuck? It's not that big of a deal. The way, and I mean, you guys know this, the way I hate finished this book because it was for a book club and I was like, I made a commitment. And I want to know how to hate. I want to know the level to which I need to hate this. And at the end of the day, I am glad I finished it because now I know for sure. Like I have this information. I'm like, this is what happened. This is what we know now. It was absolutely brutal. The vibes were simply terrible. So if you haven't read it, don't. Go read Station 11, right? That was your other book?
Yeah.
That was my absolute piece of shit book of the year. I'm glad that I had other good things this year because there were actually quite a few like decent books in the arsenal this year. This one was easily the worst.
What a journey we've been on.
The highs and the lows, guys.
Can you believe this was all this year?
This year was such a weird year to pick things for too, though, because it was like, what was this year? Like, what happened this year versus 2019? Because in a weird way, they all blended together because some things that happened in 2019, you're like, that was that long ago. But then some things that happened in 2020 feel like they were 10,000 years ago. And on that note, that was our best books of 2020. I hope you tune in for our episode next week, which is going to be an interesting one, Best Movies of 2020, where we'll be ranking the 5 movies that came out this year and just trying to figure out which one of them were good. Thank you guys so much for listening. As always, you can find us on Twitter and on Instagram at EatsCast or on Pinterest at Everyone and Their Sister Pod. Check us out. What was your best book of 2020? If you have a contradictory feeling about any of our worst books, particularly Glass Hotel, I actually don't care. Do not follow us. Do not come to our Twitter. Don't tell me about it. Keep your terrible opinions to yourself. Unsubscribe. I don't even want your listen. And let me tell you something. We need those listens. So I need you to know that's how strongly I feel about this.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much, guys. Yeah, bye. Goes to artist Clarabelle for the song Wallflower and Jazzmar for the song Please Listen Carefully.
I'm hungry.